Hello, I am Lisa Gardner, CEO of OMS Strategic Advisors and host of the Uncompromised podcast, where we have an unwavering commitment to values, beliefs, authenticity, integrity, character that always brings heart and care to an organization. I am so excited to introduce Anton Vincent. He's the president of Mars Wrigley North America. At the helm of an iconic empire of treats and snacks, Anton leads with a passion for innovation, sustainable growth, and crafting unforgettable consumer experiences. Anton's expertise isn't just in steering a collection of the world's most cherished brands, such as M&M's, Snickers, and Skittles. He's also deeply committed to nurturing the next wave of exceptional leaders, our next generation, and advocating for positive change within the confectionery industry and beyond. Hailing from Jackson, Mississippi, and boasting a solid educational background with a BBA in finance and an MBA in marketing, Anton has not only climbed at the top of the corporate ladder, but also ensures he lifts others along the way. His role extends to serving on the board of International Paper and contributing to numerous industry and university boards, reflecting a career marked by service and leadership. In this episode, we'll uncover the secrets behind Anton's strategy for maintaining the sweet spot in business, while championing initiatives like the Always a Treat initiative, which is a testament to Mars Wrigley's dedication to offering transparency and guiding consumers towards managing their sugar intake. Anton's recognition by the National Confectioners Association with the Distinguished Service Award is a mere glimpse into his influence and the impact of his pioneering spirit. Please welcome Anton. No, but I thought I would start out just first asking you, how do you know Lawrence Gardner?
Yes.
I think will lead to a little bit of your life. So tell me.
Me and Mr. Gardner go way back because when we were both in grad school, we both interned for Kraft Foods at the time in Chicago. And we found ourselves connected and needing a place to stay for the summer. So we said, hey, why don't we stay somewhere together? And so we found these two professors, Northwestern professors, who typically go off in the summertime.
Yes.
And we said, hey, sounds good. Professors probably got a good gig. Our only issue is we had to keep two cats, and neither me nor Larry had any experience in keeping cats.
With cats.
So, yes. So it was quite the summer. We ended up having a good time. We figured out the cat thing, and we were fortunate because I would sort of say we were not diligent in finding housing for our internship. So it was God's plan that, he came just in time to make sure that we had somewhere to stay for the summer.
Well, it worked out. And on top of that, a lifelong friendship. So
Absolutely.
That's special.
Yeah,
Well,
and he officially married up. So I tell him that every day. So
Anton, you're going to start something. I love this. Yes, he married up. I'm going to accept that.
Well, both of us did, because the other part to Larry's story is that Larry went to graduate school with my wife, who I did not know at the time. We were both in graduate school at the same time, different universities. So Larry and I have quite a few connections.
Yes, you do. Well,
Yes.
I'm definitely want to make a point of our families connecting. So
Yes, very much.
do that. So that leads me to my second question is, tell my listeners how your family, the community that you grew up in, what impacts did they make? What were some of your key, largest learnings that you received from parents and possibly siblings, I'm assuming, that makes you the man you are today and where you are in leadership today?
Yeah, well, Lisa, first of all, thank you for asking me that question, because like most of us who have lived life for some time, we realize the impact of a lot of things. But I know for me, I mean, my childhood and my community were probably the biggest impacts on my life still to this day. My parents, I think I had the best parents in the world. I say that every time I have an opportunity to say that, for a couple of reasons. One, my parents raised 5 African-American boys in Jackson, Mississippi in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It was a very tense time. I always tell people, when I was born, my parents didn't have the right to vote. They're American citizens, but at the time I was born, dating myself a bit, they did not have the right to vote. And so, our family is one of, education was a value in our household because my parents were educators. Advocacy was a value in our household, in the sense of community, meaning we exist to do great things, but we exist to do great things with other people, with and through other people as well. And so that sense of, and I know you were raised like this as well, I always tell people I didn't have one set of parents. I had the whole entire neighborhood sets of parents.
Whole community.
The whole community. And, and I don't, it's not like that these days, but, people kept an eye out on you. People had high expectations because my parents and parents of that generation, they were just bursting through and getting basic civil rights. So our parents always impressed upon us is, look, they did all this heavy work so we could have an opportunity to be great. And so I
Absolutely.
do think that they raised us with that sense of expectation, that sense of being boundaryless and being able to achieve the things that their generations and generations before them could not. And so I think they did a really good job in instilling that in my brothers, and just trying to give us a foundation for life, a life that they could only imagine that, we would have opportunity to open up to us in so many ways. And I would say lastly, I think they raised us not to make excuses. My parents were, my parents were loving and supportive and all those things, but my parents were disciplinarians. And so they really didn't care what the situation was. They expected us to deal with it, deal with it in all the right ways and push through. And so certainly as I have raised kids and try to raise our kids, try to make sure that they have that kind of resiliency that everyone needs in life, regardless of where you're from or what your circumstance was growing up. And so I just feel like I had a great childhood, a great set of parents, a great family, great community. And I think most of all, high expectations, which I say that all the time. That means so much to so many people, in terms of how your mind is framed and how you execute against life as well.
Absolutely. I'm finding even the way that now that I'm in this particular season of life, I've noticed that I'm falling back more on the community I grew up in and my parents' upbringing when I'm dealing with the next generation, especially in a professional setting. Are you finding some similarities? I know we have children, but
Yeah.
there's something when I see the next generation, and I want to say this correctly, but the next generation that possibly would have some challenges, right? Moving through the different areas of corporate uh,
Mhm.
business. I'm finding that I am using some of those same set of values to bring them along. I don't know if you have a
No, I
word
find,
or
and I'm a bit like you, I spend a lot of time with this next generation, for a variety of reasons. One, I have kids, we have kids similar ages, and I'm really trying to prepare them for what's ahead. I think what's fortunate around them is that we have experienced it. So we're in a better position to at least explain it to them, should they want to listen. I think the second thing is, that this next generation is going to face some challenges, in terms of, like I mentioned earlier, our parents opened doors. Some of those doors are being recharacterized now.
yes,
And I think the challenges in front of them will be different. And so I still go back to those basic things around making sure that there's hard work, there's high expectations, that you have high resiliency. And I always tell my kids, you got to show up every day. And I don't really care how you feel, but you got to show up and be ready to perform, and be ready to do that authentically, right? And I
absolutely.
think that's some of the things that I've seen a couple of generations sort of struggle with now is, what does authenticity mean to me? How
Mhm.
do I show it? Do I have permission to show it? Because like that's who I am. That's what makes me special. So how do I incorporate that into whatever environment I'm in, whether it's business, the arts, what have you? So I see a lot of them sort of struggling with how do they bring their true self out, and how do they make that a part of some existing culture? That's very much the conversation in a lot of their heads.
Absolutely. Well, and this leads to, a question that I've asked several guests, especially in the level of leadership that you're in, who run organizations, is people that have the influence or the power to initiate change for the good of everyone, right? Why are some hesitant, and why don't they? And what gives the confidence for some leaders to be able to do it with no questions asked, with no
Yeah,
doubt?
yeah, that's a really deep question. And I remember at times when I was sort of coming up through the system, if you would, where I was asking the same question. In other words, you see a circumstance, you have a power to do something about a circumstance, yet you choose not to, or you choose to do it in a way that me as a junior person feels like you're not really putting your all into it. So I do think it's a couple of things. One, I say this a lot. I've said this publicly. I just think as leaders, our number one objective is to help everyone who's under our purview to self-actualize. Everyone, right? Regardless of who you are, where you come from, who your mother and father are. I don't really care. My job is to make sure you self-actualize. And so to
Absolutely.
me, I feel like the basis of leadership is sort of built around diversity. And my responsibility as a leader is to really, have people coming behind me that can take my job, other jobs, so on and so forth, and take it further into the future. And so I see it as a fundamental sort of leadership principle. And I've also been involved with recruiting pretty much ever since I came into corporate America. So I try to really keep a really tight connection to all of the people that are coming through the system for the first time, right? For a couple of reasons. One, I get a sense around what their reality is. That's number one. Number two, I get a sense who will see who the future leaders are going to be and how do I play a role in that in some sort of balanced way. And three, I think it makes me a better leader because those people are also consumers, right? And I lead a consumer-facing business, and so I'm looking at the next generation's household and what that household's value system is and how they think about consumerism. I think about executing their own value system, as they start to form households and things of that nature. It's very important to have that multi-generational understanding and depth to ensure that I actually have better insight. I actually have better perspective, so I can lead in a much more expansive and sort of future-facing way.
Absolutely. Because when you talk about diversity as a whole, it's a business decision. So
Mm.
as you're talking about the multi-generational difference of diverse thought, diverse geographic, diverse socioeconomic culture, as well as race, because of course you are in the consumer products business where, and this goes for any business, we want to look like the marketplace we serve. So,
Sure. And not only look like it, we need to understand the marketplace
and
that we serve.
understand it. Absolutely.
Yeah, if I don't understand it, I'm not going to be successful in that marketplace, particularly if that marketplace becomes more diverse, back to your point, in every dimension. So
Absolutely.
I think it's just critical. And so, regardless of how you feel about it as a person, it's undeniable as a business insight and a business proposition that you have clarity and understanding and have some level of cultural understanding and cultural acuity in terms of who you're providing goods and services to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask you this, Anton. When you walk into rooms that don't look like you,
Mhm.
okay, let's say, and I want you to answer this question from the depth of your complete career, right? Because now you are the president of Mars North America, but I want you to look at it from just your journey. What are some things that you did to make sure that you were heard, seen at the table? You were invited to the table, and that even that times when you had to emerge as the leader, you knew that. What are some things that you did from a communication standpoint? What are some things that you did? Was there some meeting before the meetings? What are some things some insight you could give? If there's a new generation, an emerging leader, emerging talent watching this, what are some key things that you did?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that I did and Kelly, that I continue to do, Lisa, to be honest with you. And you can imagine the rooms that I walked in when I was coming up as a junior professional and junior leader, and certainly more advanced now. I'm often the only person of color. And that never really bothered me because that's the world I was used to being in. I understood that. But, the dynamics around that are interesting. The first dynamic is, what is my own psychology around entering that room? Am I highly sensitive? Do I feel like I don't fit? Do I have imposter syndrome? Those types of things. And then the second piece of it is, hey, what are people's response to me being in that room as well? So I have found over time is I'm actually less concerned about what everybody else's response is. I'm actually
Mm,
more concerned about what my psychology is, right?
mm,
What am I trying to achieve when I'm there? What am I trying to put out into that room authentically, but in a very powerful and a very intentional way? I've counseled so many professionals of color and women, and they feel defeated as soon as they get in that room that they perceive that they don't belong into. And I say, okay, look, you really need to flip that. You're in the room for a reason. So why not look, how do I maximize this room? How do I exert my power in ways that are positive and uplifting? And how do I make the narrative when I'm not in that room? One is like, wow, right? So let's approach it on that angle versus the other piece. Now, that's easy for me to say. Sometimes it's hard to execute, but I do think you have to sort of operate from a psychological perspective. And then, like anything, repetition makes a difference. You get more comfortable, you get more authentic. You're able to sort of communicate in ways that are specific to you, and you're achieving the goals that you want to achieve. So the first piece of advice is, hey, you're there because you should be there. So look, rest in your own power. Second, be intentional around what you're trying to achieve when you're in that environment. And then third is, look, there's only one you. And so you want to make sure you're tapping to what makes you special. And you want to make sure you show that to people in very authentic ways. That doesn't mean you have to do something that's off to the right or off to the left, but it is, you want people to see who you really are, because that's where your power is. Your power is not in being like someone else. Your power is not in being how someone expects you should act. Your power is rested in you. And so take that and sort of let that be a positive force. And I think as you do that with repetition, those types of circumstances become positive circumstances for you. You're looking forward to those circumstances. You're looking forward to how you want to leverage those and how you build your brand with those audiences.
Absolutely. I think it's key. I've never heard it expressed that way, but it's your own psychology. And,
Yeah.
and that makes so much sense, because when you understand who you are and you understand the power that you have and the gifts and the talents that you walk in, and even understanding your destiny, right?
Mhm.
The plan is, it becomes a no-brainer when you walk into the room. You understand
Absolutely.
what you're giving, what you're pouring in, even what you're pouring out, right?
Absolutely. And
And
my thing now, and again, I still go through this exercise, even to this day. But my thing is, I want to make that room better because I'm in that room. That's my expectation to myself. That's my speech to myself before that room. This room is going to be better because I'm here.
absolutely.
Everything else is how, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very good. Very good. Let me ask you this. What do you believe people compromise the most within our business environments?
Hmm. That's a really deep question, Lisa. A lovely question. Let me just give you a equally deep and lovely answer. You know what? We've said this word before, but I think people sometimes just sacrifice their authenticity.
Mm,
And the reason I say that because when you know people and then you see them in different environments and they're not being themselves, or they're not being the people that you know them to be. They're not bringing all of their power and what's beautiful and great and special about them to a room because now they're in a different circumstance. They're in a different context. They're in a different construct. They're in a different community. I think that's what they sacrifice. A little bit to what I talked to earlier when I talked to people in all age ranges, all levels in the business, and it's just people are still trying to understand how to step into their authenticity and the authenticity for power. And for some reason, it's fine when they're not in those rooms, but once
mhm.
they enter those rooms, there's something about those rooms. There's something about that atmosphere. There's something about the unfamiliarity of the space that forces them to be something else that they're not, or
They're not.
forces them to act in other ways that they're not. And so my admonition is you got to break that cycle. And again, it goes about being intentional and having goals and objectives when you go into places that are unfamiliar to you.
Mhm, mhm. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier. It ties in, is that repetition helps,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And the more often you walk into those rooms, the more you understand how to be authentic and be yourself.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
and then notice the results from that, right? Because they've
Sure.
always been favorable.
They've always been favorable, and Lisa, this, and I say this, I say this pretty candidly. Sometimes the stuff is in our own head. It's like, okay, I have all these machinations. I'm just like, no. Many times people really do accept you as you are.
They
Even if
truly
they're
do.
unfamiliar with you. But
They
because,
truly.
especially as people's of color, and we're not used to being in those environments, sometimes we've built up so much in our heads. And I got to
Mhm.
tell you, sometimes it's just not present.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
sometimes we got to deprogram ourselves to allow that authenticity to come through.
Absolutely. Because when it's not authentic, people see that on them. And you can contribute to something else, but it may be just contribute to the fact that you're not being your authentic self, right?
Exactly.
That's good.
Exactly.
That's good. That's good. When did you take a career risk or big jump?
Mm,
And what process mentally did you take to prepare yourself to actually do something like that?
that's a really good question. I spent a long time at one organization. So I think that organization had an opportunity to see me grow. So there was good sequence, there was good confirmation from results. There was a lot of deep 360. So, I was a well-known entity, I would say. But then I would say when I got promoted to president, my first president job at General Mills,
Mhm.
that's a big leap. That's something. Like that's a deal. Now the company has now entrusted you as an individual leader, on a really, really big chunk of business. And so I think from that perspective, it may have been the first time that I really had to confront a few things about myself. So let me give you the setup. Prior to me being promoted, I was unaware of this, but I was assigned an executive coach. First time I had, I would say, a serious, deep executive coach at that point in my career. And this executive coach happened to have been an African American gentleman, someone who had coached other CEOs, African American otherwise. And I got to tell you, he may have been the most influential person in my life outside of my parents and my basketball coach. And for a couple of reasons. One, he had a really good way of talking to me in ways that I could hear it. And that's really clear, in ways that I could hear it. And he helped me delve into why I acted in certain ways. Here's an example. Feedback I would get is Anton's great, Anton's very productive, here's his numbers, so on and so forth. But sometimes Anton feels like he has to be the smartest person in the room. And that wasn't something that I think I did consciously, but I would say that I always carried around a high expectation that I got to know my stuff. I got to know all the answers. And I think anybody who's been in business sort of has had that feeling. But I felt for me, just as a person who wanted to be successful, and be thought of properly. But also, if I had to be honest, as an African American leader, I want to sort of say, hey, look, I need to show you a new package. You need to know that people like me are capable of doing big things and doing big things consistently. So some of that was sort of weight that I was putting on myself. And I think the way that it came out was, wow, this guy has to be right. This guy has to be the smartest person in the room. So that was really the first time that I think someone who I think understood me as a leader and someone who understood me culturally was able to talk to me in a way to deprogram me on a couple of things that I think at that point, it had been pretty successful for me to think in that manner. It had been pretty successful for me to prepare myself, my own psychology in terms of how I flow in an environment as well. So I think that was the first time where I took a leap to, one, understand more about myself, about not only what I do, but why I do it. And I'll give you a perfect example. There's a couple of things that came out of that was I'm the fifth of five boys. So I'm the baby. And so in my household, I had to scrap for everything I got.
There you
And
go.
so,
There it is.
yeah. And so when you take that mentality into a corporate environment, it looks different. I'm also an athlete. I was an athlete all through college. And so I have a certain mentality around how to compete. I have a certain mentality around accountability. I have a certain mentality around winning, right? There's good tension behind it. I don't think I was dysfunctional with it, but there was a lot of energy around that. So understanding how those elements around both the experiences that I had and the psychology that I had built, and then how do I bring that to higher level leadership? That was the first time I really had to deal with that, and it was enlightening for me because I can't say that I learned anything new, but what I learned was how it impacted my environment. And now about to rise again, I did not know this, but about to take on my first president role. Clearly, all the great things that are great about you will be great, but all the things that you don't understand about yourself will be exposed immediately, right?
Yes,
And, and,
absolutely.
so, and so I thought that was a really pivotal time in terms of me, I think, taking control around how I wanted to insert my leadership, how I wanted to project. And I think it elevated me in terms of being a much more intentional leader and on a very authentic base.
You just answered one of my questions I was going to ask you about leadership is when you took a pivotal role or a pivot and changed your leadership style in order to
Yeah,
fit an organization. And there's the answer right there.
yeah, yeah.
Still being a transformative leader, but also being an emotionally connected leader. I believe in the gentleman telling you that it
Yeah.
allowed you to get to deeper emotional connections with the people that you served, right? So
No, it did. I thought it taught me something about organizations, particularly if you start to ascend to senior levels, because your influence is bigger. What I say and what I do and the decisions that I make and how I lead now has a much larger impact, in this case,
yes.
on a public entity.
Mhm.
So the people who were making those decisions, like they want to be sure, like they want to be sure that there is consistency and that there's understanding. I mean, clearly the value system was intact, the performance was intact, and so on and so forth. But you're handing parts of the keys of the kingdom, off to an individual that you're elevating. And so I think what I also appreciated is for organizations, there is a lot that goes into the types of decisions they make about who's going to lead parts of those organizations. And many times you don't know that until you get there. right? Well, I could say we don't know that until we until we get there,
Yeah.
right? I think it elevated my organizational awareness, and I
Mhm.
think that organizational awareness helped me to be a better leader for sure.
Absolutely. That makes sense. You just taught me something. That's great. Let me ask you this. You talk about leaders and you talked about the gentleman who mentored you. And we've often talked about mentorship versus sponsorship. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming through your career, you've had both, right? Um, what kind of leaders do you give me some of the leaders that have impacted your life, whether you've met them or you haven't?
Yeah.
What
I,
kind of leaders or who were they or that impacted your life the most?
I think well, I've had so many. I've had the fortune of, first of all, working with some incredibly talented people. Leaders, yes, but just incredibly talented individuals. And so I think one of the things that I've always known about myself is I am not shy about asking people questions. So I have been able to not only identify people, but I think connect with people in very unique ways where they elevate my level of learning. So I think it's one thing. I think the second thing is I was very fortunate in my prior organization having a couple of African American leaders, certainly when I started, that were, very highly placed in the organization. And, they were role models. They were very unusual for sort of who they were at their levels at that time. We're talking early 90s. And, having that consistency and having someone that is at a place that you want to get to, I just can't tell you what that does for a younger person. So one, it says it's possible because I see that person doing it. I see that
Yes.
person not just doing it, excelling at it, right? And also I have access to that person, and that person is reciprocating. So I would say I've always been raised around advocacy and sort of building community, but also seeing it reciprocated to me was just confirmatory. So I always said, boy, if I ever got to the point where I can help people, man, that's me. That's what I do. That's who I am. And so I think it confirmed some things that were very consistent with my value system and how I was raised. I think secondly, for me, I think it gave me, I would say, great energy around what my responsibility is as I climb. I would say I've always had that as a foundation, just as a person and how my parents raised me. But in corporate situations, for most people of color, and candidly for a lot of individuals, um, most people's mother or father weren't corporate executives. Most people didn't work in office environments. My parents were teachers. They knew nothing about a corporate environment. And everybody around us were primarily laborers. And so the world I grew up in was not the world I was trying to excel in. And so you don't have that perspective, you don't have that foundation. And I said, boy, I would always felt like I had a responsibility to sort of give people, I always sort of say, make the corporate opaqueness clear. Because what you find with, especially with junior individuals, they're always smart, smart as all get out. What they lack is context. What they lack is understanding what's happening around them. And what they lack is a severe underappreciation of the power that they already have today. They sorely lack that. And so what I try to do is to make sure I'm filling in those gaps, that I'm trying to give them context, that I'm trying to sort of reinforce that, boy, you're here for a reason. You just got to learn how to, A, you got to perform consistently. But B, you got to understand how do you tap the power that you already have, right? To make everybody around you better, to make the organization better as well. So for me, that was just, I try to practice sort of flipping that script. And I think having mentors have helped me to hone that, to understand that and do it in my own way.
Absolutely. You're reminding me, I had the pleasure of interviewing one of my longtime mentors, Ron Parker. And
Right.
uh,
Ex-PepsiCo,
yes, yes.
yeah.
And I met him when I was 28, 29 years old, and had an assignment at Frito-Lay when he was there. And I remember him always stressing to me that it's what you're bringing to the organization.
Absolutely.
And it's the same thing that you're saying right here.
Absolutely.
It's having context of who you are within this mass structure,
Yeah,
right? And what you are, what is it that you are bringing? Always understand that you are bringing something that no one else can replace, right? And then
absolutely.
finding that little piece, right? And really, for me, it was a real focus against that strength, you can call it,
Mhm.
or that particular gift that I had, or or
Right.
just the nature of who I was as an African American female, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, that reminds me, I mean, that's just pure wisdom, even in our season of life, even right now, always remembering that. Now that we have a lot more practice, we inherently or innately do that when we walk into rooms. But that is something that I remember that he truly, truly wanted me to get. So you brought back.
Well, at least I'm glad you brought that up. This is a perfect example. And so when a couple of leaders I was talking about earlier happened to be members of ELC, Executive Leadership Council.
Yes.
And so many of them would take the junior people to the big banquets, every October. And one of the most impressive people I ever met was Ron Parker. Because, and for those who don't know, Ron exudes a level of confidence that is real, that is authentic, that is in your face, right?
Authentic. Yes.
Authentic, very authentic. Yeah, and not off-putting, but it's like wow. And so, when you and I don't think I ever had any issues around it, but when you see people that are really steeped into who they are, and I go back to my central principle, then how they're making the place better, then and they look like you, and that gives you confidence. So that's mentorship from afar. That's seeing somebody do and be things that are very authentic and giving you hope and confidence that you can do it too. So when we start talking about diversity on a broader context, presence matters. Leadership matters because yes, it's great for the person to be where they are, but it's more important in terms of who they're impacting and how they and just their very presence is helping to build a pipeline and helping to build that possibility that this people or these people or you know prior generations or future generations can do it too.
Absolutely. You reminded me how there was a when you talked about Ron Parker, and there was a few more in my life as well, but when you talk about the executives back during that time and that season, there was such a safety net that you felt as the next generation. And I didn't realize it until years later, right? There was a safety net they provided. And part of it was the fact that they were authentic in walking
Mhm.
into the room. You felt the authenticity, even though you did not call it that.
Yeah.
You felt it, and even when you had one-on-ones, you knew that they were all for your success. There
Yeah.
was absolutely, you knew they wanted you to succeed at, you know, complete. I was going to say at all costs, but not at all costs
No,
past.
I know exactly what you're saying. And
You know, but
I,
yes,
I'll just add to that, Lisa. Not only wanted you to succeed, they expected you to succeed.
expect it. Yes,
They
yes.
expect you just like, look, I'm having this conversation because, and here's what I tell my children. I tell my children, you have no excuse.
I say
You
no
have, you,
option.
you have no excuse. You got all the insight. You got all the
That's right.
resources. You just got to go make it happen.
That's
So
right.
what I appreciated about it is, and I try to share that with all my team, whoever they are today. It's like, look, I try to set a high bar, and this high bar starts with me. And then I try to pass that high bar and that expectation on to other people. And then I try to give them the confidence that they can meet that bar as well. And so that's what my mentors did for me. Had
Yeah,
excellence. They were authentic. They themselves were setting a high leadership bar, and they expected that I would follow.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So good. So good. How do you think the landscape of consumer buying power? When I wrote out this question for you, I thought of my consumer days with
Mm,
Frito-Lay and Pepsi
mm,
Cola and those kind of things. But how do you think the landscape of consumer buying power has evolved, and where do you think it's going? Can
mm.
you also touch on the Always a Treat initiative? I find that a
Now,
great
always what?
Always a Treat initiative. It's
Always a treat. Yes, yes. I'll touch on that.
So I'll
Let's talk.
touch on that, but just the landscape of consumer buying power.
Yeah. A couple of things. I think one of the beautiful things about consumerism these days is I think consumers are so much more locked in on what they purchase, whether it's products or services and experiences, what have you. Look, people are investing in experiences. It's not just I'll use my own product. People's like, yes, I'll go buy M&Ms. But look, first thing they do with them, they turn it over. They see what the ingredients are. They see where the ingredients are sourced. Those types of
Yes.
things. They want to know who the company is, who runs the company. So I would say consumers are so much more locked in on what they're buying. It's not just sort of nascent consumerism, i.e., I want it because I want it and I can afford it. I always say, particularly with this generation, with the Gen Z generation in particular, they are
Yes.
probably, they are probably the most values-based consumer group we've had.
Ever.
And one,
Yes.
they have more information,
Mhm.
so that's clear. But they have a value system, and that value system is highly tuned now. And so when you connect information with the value system, everything that they purchase has a reason to it. Everything they purchase is intentional. So what that means is someone who is, in our case, a product goods company that's selling things directly to consumers, it raises the bar around making sure that we are who we say we are, our brands are what they say they are, and there's consistency around that. And if it's not, consumers will call you out. And at the very least, they will stop buying you. So I think that's what I see, I think, in the market these days. And that's Gen Z, but I would sort of say, it's millennial generation as well. They probably started it. But that connection between my value system and what I choose to spend my money on is something as small as M&Ms or a house. I think they're connecting their value system with their purchases so much more intently these days as well. And so I think for marketers and people who sell to the public, it is really taking our game up in terms of how we build our brands, how we articulate our brands, how we build ecosystems around that, and then how do we sort of coexist with our targets, right? So on the Everything's a Treat initiative has been interesting. I happen to operate in a space. I always tell people I think I have the sweetest job in the world, literally and figuratively. One, work for a fantastic company, the Mars company, who is 100% owned by the Mars family. We're a $50 billion company. We're number one confectionery company in the world. We're the number one pet care company in the world. We have a beautiful diagnostics business that sort of connects our pet ecosystem together, and we also have a very unique food business as well. And so it's a company that's not constructed like any other company in our space. But I think the beautiful part about it is, we have a tremendous economic engine, but that engine is really built to go and do things to go and change the world for good. So it's a beautiful construct when you think about how do you marry economics with purpose. And we don't think that has to be trade-offs on those things as well. We need economics to go and invest in purpose, but we see it as a bit of a virtuous cycle. I always tell people that we operate off of something called the compass, and that compass is essentially a construct between executive management and the family around not only the goals, but how we want to achieve those goals. And at the top of that compass is, like you would see in any other public company, sales, revenue, earnings, cash, so on and so forth, how we allocate capital. But at the bottom of it, it is how do we make the world a better place? And part of my long-term compensation are just as predicated on the top as they are on the bottom. So that puts good tension in terms of how we lead the company forward as well. So I say all that to say that that gives you context to Always a Treat initiative, because because what we're trying to do, and Mars has sort of led in that initiative, from the National Confectionery Association, is just making sure that we create better context for what we do on the confectionery side, right?
Yes.
Trying to make sure that people consume responsibly, that people have a very clear understanding around what is inside our products, how we source those products, what are the ecosystems that get us from a cocoa plant on a tree in Africa to your M&Ms, your Snicks, your Twix, your Snickers, going down the line. So I think we're very embedded in making sure that we provide people great context and know that this is a function of choice, and essentially not to overconsume what we in the industry have to offer. And so that Always a Treat is making sure that we're firmly placing what we do as a treat option that should be in the context of a well-balanced diet, right? So we've been able to really successfully execute that over the last several years. And implicit in that as well is making sure that we're getting some of our calorie counts down. So 90% of the stuff that we sell is less than 200 calories per serving. And so again, it's this whole concept around purpose and responsibility, while we're trying to drive and compete in a very highly competitive space. Snacking in general, as you would know this in your days, the $700 billion category around the world. Right now, we play in parts of it, not all of it. It's a category that's not going anywhere. It's going to grow. It helps people make sense out of life, but we want to make sure people think about it in the proper context, and therefore consume in the proper context as well, and not overconsume. So that Always a Treat was meant to characterize that in a way to make sense, that's fun, and still allows us to run our business models as well.
Well, I thought it was a brilliant initiative. And that was one point I was going to point out to you, because I think when I look at, I'm around the next generation a lot. And I was smiling when you talked about there's always a value to their purchases. I have a 21-year-old daughter who said, I'm buying this particular pair of pants, so I think it was a pair of trousers, is because so much of my dollars are going back to I forget what they were called, to help with the animals or tropical
Yeah.
jungle, right? There's always a cause behind the things they're buying. It's not just because they buy it and it's cute, like you said, right? So then when I looked at the Always Treat initiative, I
Yeah.
thought to myself, that initiative is brilliant, especially in understanding the generation that
Mhm.
if you're going to target generation, they want to understand what's in it.
They want
Everything about the purity of things. And, anyway, yes.
Yeah, no, it's well, I could talk for hours about Gen Z because they're so interesting. And you and I both have Gen Z in our household, so
I'm telling you, she's my best focus group. She really
yeah.
is. Really is. Here is my last question to you. And I want you to get on with your day here. There was an article that was published on LinkedIn entitled Leadership Green Flags. And you and I have touched a little bit on this through the interview. And what they were meaning is, here are the great things leaders do. Okay. And here's just to name a few. They take an interest in your life outside of work. They ask for your ideas. They ask for your feedback on the company's culture. Give every room they walk into a burst of energy. They praise in public and discipline in private. Where have you seen any or all of these green flags, Anton, providing effective leadership within the organizations you have served?
Yeah, well, first of all, I absolutely agree with that list. We hit on some of those earlier, I believe, as well. And I would characterize as several of those as I think some of the best leaders are just great listeners, really great listeners.
I would.
Yes, especially as you get to senior levels, because I always tell people my value is not in doing the work. My value is in creating the environment so everybody else can be successful. That's what I get paid to do,
That's
right?
right.
Now, I can't create an environment to make sure everybody's successful unless A, I know what they're doing, that I'm connecting with them, that I'm engaging with them, that I'm listening to them, that I'm making changes, and that for me, that I'm participating with who comes into this organization, recruiting, right? So I think all of those are very, very relevant. And I think the context to all of those are that leaders have to be active. Gone are the days I can sit back in some corner office and, throw shots out there and let everybody go and do their thing. Like you have to be active. Leaders have to have a point of view. I think leaders have to be willing to be wrong. I mean, I think one of the things I do, particularly when I'm recruiting people on my leadership team, is the first thing I tell them is that I don't have to be right. And what I'm saying is, I expect you to challenge me. I expect you to have a point of view. I expect you to put that point of view on the table because, again, my value is not in doing the work. My value is in creating the environment to make sure everybody else is successful. And I don't think everybody else can be successful unless everybody has the psychological safety to put their stuff on the table with passion and with clarity as well. And so I think that works for leaders and leadership teams. But also, I think that's great modeling for when the rest of the organization, who, by the way, is all looking up at you.
Yes.
Everything you're doing as a leader, everybody is watching, they're tracking it. And there's a couple things they're looking for. Is this a real person? Is this person consistent with who they are? Mm-hmm. What they say and what they do in concert with one another, right? So I always say that leadership is a thing, and that thing has to be well contemplated, it has to be well executed, and it has to be authentic and transparent. And I think if leaders can stay in that zone, I think they have an opportunity to sort of impact that environment in ways that make sense and push their companies forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think well said, and a well ending to you being a leader that, when I started this podcast, there was one thing that I knew for sure, and I wanted to highlight those not being perfect, but they strive every day in some way not to compromise who they are, right? Mm-hmm. And you are an example of that leader. As much as I have read about you, as much as I've heard about you through my years with Lawrence, I definitely knew automatically that you were someone I wanted to highlight to not only the next generation, but even continue to inspire our generation, Anton. This podcast is for those to stay focused on what is the right thing to do, right? And I think authenticity has been the theme in this, and I just want to say thank you. I am more impressed than before I got on, and I was awfully impressed before I got on this podcast.
Well, first of all, let me say this. I love your podcast. I remember when you first started because your husband let me know about it, and I just appreciate you stepping out and making it happen and having incredibly high quality dialogue. And I've watched a couple of other ones, and you just had some incredible people on as well. So just congratulations and keep doing it. This whole concept of leadership is real, and it's evolving, and it's important that people are able to have and hear conversations like this, and hopefully they're helpful and gives them the tools, which I know you're interested in making sure that it's not Anton, you can do it too. There's no mystery to this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we need to stay focused, especially where we are, as a nation, we need to stay focused on what's true, uncompromised. So
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Hey, it's been great talking to you. You tell you're the better half. You tell your other half. I said hello. And say hi to your son. Say hi to your son too. I really enjoyed our conversation we had last week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure my other half will be calling you after this. Okay. All right. Okay.
Take care.
Thank you.